She fed a homeless woman outside the restaurant, got canned for it, and figured that was the end of the line. Little did she know, that woman was a mafia boss's missing mother, and he's not one to forget a favor, especially one paid in kindness. Rain lashed against the restaurant windows like pebbles tossed on a still pond. The cold drops streaked down the glass, blurring the golden light spilling from inside. Pier 13 glowed like a beacon on a dingy Brooklyn corner, a place where wealth and poverty were separated by nothing more than a pane of glass. Rachel Bennett, 38, wiped down table 7 for the third time that night, her legs feeling numb inside her worn-out shoes, the heels of which had long given up the ghost. For more than 8 hours, she'd been on her feet, smiling, carrying plates, collecting tips that were mostly coins. But Friday night showed no sign of winding down. Laughter bubbled through the air. Glasses clinked. Silverware chimed against porcelain. The scent of grilled meat, expensive wine, and designer perfume mingled into a heady aroma that Rachel could only inhale but never taste. She glanced at the clock. 10:43 p.m. Just over an hour until she could clock out and go home. If nothing else happened, home meant the 5th floor walk up across the bridge, a cramped apartment in a crumbling building. It meant kicking off her shoes and sinking into the old couch that doubled as a bed, then waking up and doing it all again. That was Rachel's life. Not comfortable, not secure, just enough to keep going in a city that swallowed people whole. Rachel, table 12 needs more water. The voice of Calvin Riggs, the night manager, snapped from behind her, more command than request. Yes, right away, she replied, grabbing the water pitcher, forcing a polite smile. But as she turned, she froze, staring through the rain-smeared glass. A lone figure stood outside. A woman, her gray hair matted from the storm, wrapped in a shabby trench coat that looked salvaged from a dumpster. Her face was pressed against the window, eyes deep and hollow, staring inside at the warmth, the laughter, the people dining as if the world beyond the glass didn't exist. Something twisted in Rachel's chest. She'd seen eyes like that before, back when she volunteered at soup kitchens in Ohio. The eyes of those who had forgotten the taste of a full meal, who no longer remembered what it felt like to be treated as human. The woman's body trembled violently, her shoulders shaking even from 20 feet away. Rachel, the water. Calvin's voice cut through her thoughts, sharper now. She nodded quickly, trying to focus. But every time she passed near the door, her gaze returned to that woman still standing in the rain, as if waiting for a miracle. At last, Rachel set the pitcher down, heart pounding. She walked toward the door, a decision she knew wasn't smart, might even be a mistake, but it felt right. And sometimes, in a world full of wrongs, doing the right thing felt like a crime. Calvin was distracted, chatting with a loyal customer who tipped in large bills. That gave her maybe 5 minutes. She opened the door. The cold wind and rain slapped her face like a warning. "Ma'am," she said softly. The woman startled, taking a step back. Up close, Rachel could see the lines etched deep into her weathered face. She looked about 60, but her eyes carried centuries. Her hair was tangled, her expression dazed, yet those eyes... My God, those eyes were what kept Rachel from walking away. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." The woman stammered. "Would you like to come inside?" Rachel interrupted gently, just to get warm out of the rain. I don't have any money," the woman murmured, barely audible. "That's okay." Rachel gripped the door handle tighter. "Come in or you'll catch your death out here." The woman stared at her as if she couldn't comprehend the offer. No one had spoken to her that kindly in a very long time. Then, almost entranced, she stepped inside. Rachel led her to a quiet corner near the women's restroom, a spot few patrons noticed. A few heads turned. A woman in pearls frowned. A man in an expensive suit whispered something to his date, and they both laughed. Heat flushed Rachel's cheeks, but she kept walking. She was doing the right thing. "Please sit here," she said. "I'll be right back." She hurried to the kitchen. 1 bowl of hot vegetable soup, 2 rolls, a glass of water, total $14. She paid out of her own tips, the money she'd set aside to cover tomorrow's overdue electric bill. She didn't care. The power company could wait. Hunger couldn't. When she brought the food out, the woman began to cry silently. No sobs, just tears rolling down as she lifted the spoon with trembling hands. Then came the footsteps, heavy, quick, angry. Rachel knew exactly what was coming. She drew a deep breath and stepped in front of the table. The real storm was only just beginning. Calvin Riggs strode toward the corner table, his face flushed with fury. The sharp sound of his leather shoes echoed against the glossy floor. Diners paused mid-bite, heads turning. One waiter glanced at Rachel, eyes wide in warning, but she was already standing her ground, hands clenched before her apron, gaze unwavering. "Rachel!" he hissed, his voice tight as if restraining fury in front of customers. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The homeless woman lowered her head over the bowl of soup, her shoulders shaking, but this time not from the cold. Rachel stood still, her voice soft yet steady. "She was hungry, and it's raining. I just thought she deserved something to eat." Calvin looked at the woman, then back at Rachel, contempt flashing in his eyes. "You brought a homeless person into this restaurant? Do you even know what kind of place this is? People spend hundreds of dollars here for dinner. It's not your little charity project." A whisper rippled from the next table, followed by a mocking laugh. Rachel could feel every gaze in the restaurant pressing down on her. She swallowed hard. "I didn't mean to cause trouble. I paid for it myself with my own tips. I just wanted to help." Calvin snatched the bowl off the table, soup spilling across the pristine white tablecloth. The woman flinched, curling in on herself like a frightened animal. Rachel instinctively took a step forward. "Don't." His voice dropped low, heavy with threat. "You just made this place look like the worst dump in Brooklyn. You made our guests uncomfortable. And worst of all, who do you think you are, deciding who gets to sit here?" "She's a person," Rachel said quietly, her voice trembling. She needed help for a few seconds. Calvin said nothing. The silence was suffocating. Then he held out his hand. "Give me the apron. You're fired." A wave of dizziness swept over her. She heard the faint clatter of silverware, someone's quick intake of breath. Even the kitchen had gone silent. She knew she should say something, beg, explain. But when she looked at the woman's worn, frightened face, she couldn't turn away. Not this time. She untied the apron, folded it neatly, and placed it in Calvin's hand. She didn't say a word. He stared at her, waiting for her to crumble, to regret it. But Rachel simply turned to the woman sitting silently at the table. "Go ahead and eat," she said softly. "It's all right. Take your time." Then she walked out of the restaurant. The rain was still falling, soaking through her canvas shoes until her toes went numb. Her hair clung to her face, dripping cold. The night's tips, her only cash for the week, were still in the drawer she hadn't dared to open. How would she survive the month? She didn't know. The electric bill, her sister's medicine, the rent. All of it blurred together in the curtain of rain. She kept her head down, shoulders hunched against the wind. Behind her, she knew Calvin was already clearing the table, erasing the evidence as if kindness had never existed there at all. But some things, once done, can't be undone. A single act of compassion, no matter how small, no matter the cost, can set in motion consequences no one could ever predict. And somewhere else in the city, a man was about to learn that his mother, the woman he loved more than life itself, the one who had vanished without a trace, had just been saved by a waitress who lost her job over a bowl of soup. And when he found out, Rachel's world would never be the same again. Vincent Moretti was never slow to act when it came to his mother. When the call came near midnight, he was alone on the top floor of a luxury high-rise in Manhattan, a half-empty glass of wine on the table beside him, the city lights stretching like veins across the window. The phone rang 3 times before he answered. Ellie Romano's voice, deep and urgent, came through the line. "There's something you should know, boss. A woman showed up tonight at the Pier 13. Matches Mrs. Helen's description. Thin, gray hair, old trench coat. Staff said she stood outside in the rain for an hour. A waitress brought her in, fed her, and got fired on the spot. Vincent set his glass down and slowly rose to his feet. He didn't ask why Eli was watching that kind of place. In his world, no detail was ever too small. "Do you have a picture?" "Yes." Eli sent a photo via text. Blurry, taken through a rain-streaked window, but clear enough to see the frail, gray-haired woman sitting alone in a corner, a steaming bowl of soup before her. Vincent stared at the image, his chest tightening. It was her, his mother. 7 months missing. 7 months with no sign. Nada. The police had found nothing. The private investigators, the connections, even the facial recognition software, all had failed. She had vanished as if erased from existence. And now she was there again, in a rain-blurred photo, eating a bowl of soup in a restaurant she could never have entered without someone's help. "Who's the waitress?" Vincent asked, his voice lower than usual. "Name's Rachel Bennett, 38. Worked there almost a year. Clean record. No trouble. Widow, no kids. Originally from Ohio. Moved to Brooklyn 2 years ago. Used her tip money tonight to pay for the meal. And she was fired right after," Eli added after a pause. "According to the manager, she was stubborn and hard to control." Vincent closed his eyes. He could picture it vividly. Rachel standing there alone, trying to defend a stranger in a world that punished kindness. And his mother, trembling, frail, finding shelter in the compassion of someone like her. "Send me her address," he said quietly. "Full background and keep your distance. She's not to know we're watching." "Yes, boss. And your mother?" Vincent opened his eyes. "Call the men. 3 cars. I want to be at the pier in 15 minutes. 15 minutes later, black cars glided through the rain-slicked streets. When Vincent stepped out, the air seemed to hold its breath. No one inside the restaurant dared to move. Calvin Riggs, the manager who had fired Rachel less than an hour earlier, was locking up when he saw the man approaching, his face drained of color, his hand trembling on the key. "Mr. Moretti, I didn't know you were coming. We're closed." "I'm not here to eat," Vincent said, his tone calm and cold. "I'm here to ask about a woman who was here tonight. Homeless, gray hair, old coat." Calvin stammered. Yes, there was a woman like that, but she's gone now. One of our former staff fed her." Vincent's expression didn't change. "Tell me everything from the beginning." Calvin recounted the events, every word choking in his throat. Rachel using her own tip money, the argument, the firing, the disruption of policy. When he finished, Vincent stood silent for a long moment. He looked through the rain-streaked glass at the corner where his mother had sat. She might still be cold. She might still be walking somewhere out there in the night. "That woman," he said slowly, "is my mother." Calvin froze, his body rigid. I didn't know. I couldn't have imagined." "Of course you didn't," Vincent replied, stepping closer, though he didn't need to raise his voice. "Because you didn't see her as a person. You saw a torn coat, a problem, an image that didn't fit your perfect dining room." Calvin said nothing. His throat worked, but no sound came out. Vincent turned away, taking the file Eli had handed him. "That waitress," he said softly, "did what I haven't been able to do for 7 months." And from that moment on, in Vincent Moretti's mind, Rachel Bennett was no longer a nameless waitress. She was the woman who had shown his mother the kindness the world had long denied her. And in his world, deaths like that were never forgotten. It was still raining when Vincent stepped into the courtyard of St. Lenina Lucia's convent, a secluded place deep in South Brooklyn that few people even knew existed. Dim yellow light spilled from a small window on the ground floor, flickering across the puddles that mirrored the stone walls. Eli waited silently in the car. Vincent motioned for him to stay. He wanted to go alone. Inside, a woman sat by the fireplace, her frail hands clasped together, her hair still damp, loosely wrapped in a clean towel. Beside her, a cup of tea sent up thin tendrils of steam. Helen Moretti, once a schoolteacher, once the woman who taught Vincent how to read his first lines, now sat quietly as if belonging to another world. 7 months without word, without a call, without a trace, and now she appeared again, ghost-like yet dignified in her silence. Vincent paused in the doorway, not yet able to cross the threshold. He didn't hide his emotions. His eyes rested on the mother he had almost believed he'd never see again. Helen lifted her head as if she had known he was there all along. Their eyes met, and for a long moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. Words could never hold all the sleepless nights, the emptiness, the questions left hanging in the dark. Vincent stepped forward and slowly knelt on one knee before her. He had never done that for anyone. Not in business, not in the streets, not before power or fear. But here, in this small, quiet room scented with wood smoke and warm tea, he was nothing more than a son who had lost his mother to silence. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Helen placed a trembling hand on his knee, not forceful, but enough to stop the apology that was coming next. "No need," she murmured, her voice weaker than he remembered. "You found me." "I should have found you sooner," he said. 7 months. Do you know what I thought? That you were gone." Helen closed her eyes, her shoulders quivering, but she didn't cry. When she left, she hadn't planned it. One morning, after a bitter argument between them about the life he'd chosen, the life built on control, power, and fear, she simply stood up, took a small bag, withdrew her savings, and disappeared from the world she had once tried so hard to protect him from. "How did you live all this time?" Vincent's voice rasped. Helen looked into the fire as if watching her memories flicker in the flames. "I slept at train stations, sometimes in parks, sometimes in abandoned churches. But I wasn't afraid," Helen said softly. "I just wanted to know what it feels like, what all those people out there live through every day. I needed to understand why I was wrong not to stop you when I still could." "I didn't do evil, Mother," Vincent replied, his voice low. "I only did what I thought was right to protect the people I love." Helen shook her head slowly. "There are things that are right, my son, that should never come at the cost of someone else's fear." Vincent said nothing. He knew she had never approved of what he did, of the way he ruled with influence, money, and fear, but he also knew she had never stopped loving him. Even when she walked away, it wasn't abandonment. It was a way of finding herself again. "I found you because of someone," he said at last. "A waitress. She didn't know who you were. She only saw that you were cold and hungry, and she gave you a bowl of soup, paid for it with her own tips, and she was fired for it." Helen turned to him, surprise flickering in her eyes for the first time. "A bowl of soup?" she asked, as if such a simple thing were too small to hold so much meaning. Vincent nodded. "You're still out there, Mother, in me and in people like her." Helen closed her eyes, and this time a tear slid down her cheek. "Then live in a way that's worthy of that bowl of soup," she said quietly. The room fell silent again, but now it was the silence of understanding, the kind that doesn't need words, only presence. And from that moment, Vincent knew his world would never be the same, not just because he had found his mother, but because he owed a debt to a stranger named Rachel Bennett, a debt he was determined to repay with everything he had. 3 days after that quiet reunion, the New York sky was still gray, as if winter refused to leave. Rachel Bennett sat in her tiny apartment wrapped in a thick, old sweater, her hands cupped around a mug of cold coffee. Her eyes were distant, staring at the rain sliding down the window pane. Since being fired, she hadn't left home, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't know where to go or how to begin again. The unpaid electric bill lay on the table beside a warning notice from her landlord. Everything was piling up like a snowball rolling toward a cliff. The sudden ring of her phone startled her. An unknown number. She hesitated for a few seconds before answering. A gentle, precise female voice came through the line, professional, polite, and oddly calm. "Good afternoon, Miss Bennett. I'm calling from Civic Hope Fund's Medical Debt Assistance Office. We're pleased to inform you that your medical debt has been fully cleared." Rachel frowned. "I'm sorry," she said. "There must be a mistake. I never applied for any program like that. I've never even heard of your fund." "I understand, ma'am," the voice replied kindly. "However, the payment was submitted through our anonymous relief program. Verification has been completed. You no longer owe anything." Before Rachel could ask another question, The call ended as swiftly and courteously as it had begun. She sat frozen, the phone still in her hand, her heart pounding. That couldn't be true. The debt wasn't small. It was the money she had borrowed to cover her sister's hospital bills. She had worked extra shifts, skipped meals, saved every penny just to chip away at it bit by bit. Who would possibly do this for her? Meanwhile, on the top floor of a limestone building overlooking Central Park, Vincent Moretti sat in his office, gazing out at the bleak sky. On his desk lay a detailed report from Eli, Rachel's finances, her apartment, her work history, her recent struggles, even her sister's current health status in Ohio. Vincent read every line carefully, leaving nothing unread. "She's the kind who puts others before herself," Eli said as he entered, his tone edged with respect. Not many people would spend their last paycheck feeding a stranger in the rain. Vincent didn't respond. He only nodded slightly. "That's more than kindness," he said quietly. "That's courage. The courage to lose her job, her income, her dignity in the eyes of others just to do what's right." He didn't know much about Rachel, but he knew what it was like to live in a world where kindness was seen as weakness, and he wasn't going to let her pay the price for that. "Her name's already on an internal blacklist," Eli continued. "Word spread among restaurant managers. Labeled as difficult, insubordinate. She won't find work in this city again, at least not in this line." Vincent looked up. "Remove her name from that list. Everywhere. And make sure that wherever she applies, if it's a decent place, she gets hired. Quietly. No one needs to know." "And her rent?" Eli asked. "Cover the next 3 months," Vincent replied, "through a community support program. No cash transfers, legal and clean." He leaned back in his chair, his expression softening just slightly. "And one more thing," he said. "Make sure she never feels indebted. This isn't charity, it's gratitude." Across the city, Rachel opened her mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a receipt confirming that her rent had been paid in full through the end of April. She stood frozen in the doorway, her mind caught between fear and the faintest glimmer of light piercing through her loneliness. Someone somewhere was helping her, not out of pity, but for something deeper. Rachel didn't know that a single bowl of soup on a rainy night had set in motion a chain of debts, not the kind measured in money, but in humanity, and Vincent Moretti was a man who never let such debts go unanswered. Rachel stepped out of the building, the rent receipt still warm in her hand. Her thoughts were tangled. She wanted to believe it was a miracle, but deep down, some quiet instinct whispered that miracles didn't just appear out of nowhere. She shook her head, forcing herself to stay hopeful. Maybe someone in the building had helped. Maybe a charity had taken notice of her situation. Whoever it was, at least she could breathe for another month. That morning, Rachel decided to start looking for a new job. She couldn't just sit still. She wasn't used to a life without motion. No shifts, no schedule, no coworkers. Even if most of them barely tolerated her. She reprinted her resume, brushed out her tangled hair, and put on the cleanest white blouse she had left after countless hand washings. "Today has to be the day I start over," she told herself. The first restaurant turned her down the moment she said her name. The manager glanced at her resume and muttered, "Sorry, we're looking for someone with a more suitable background." No explanation, no questions, no chance. The second restaurant didn't even take her application, just gave her a quick once-over and shook their head. By the fourth rejection, within 3 hours, Rachel began to understand. She stopped at a small cafe near the park, a place that used to post help-wanted signs for part-time workers. Inside, the manager was chatting with a customer. Rachel waited politely, then handed over her resume. The woman took it, read the name, and looked up with a thin, tight smile. "You used to work at the Pier 13? "Yes," Rachel said softly. "For a little over 10 months. I'd heard there was some trouble with your previous manager, some issues with attitude, and a few customer complaints." Rachel blinked, stunned. "That's not true. I didn't cause any trouble. I just helped a woman outside. I even paid for her meal myself. But he wouldn't accept that." The manager shook her head. "I understand, but we have policies. I can't hire anyone who's on the internal red list. Good luck to you. Rachel walked out, her throat tight. Red list. 3 simple words, but they felt like a life sentence. She'd heard whispers about it from former coworkers, about how upscale restaurant chains kept an internal database of problem employees. And now her name was there, glowing somewhere in that invisible network like a quiet warning. Do not hire. She returned home late that afternoon, her legs aching, her mind heavy. She opened her laptop and searched for freelance jobs. Waitressing, cashier work, cleaning. Anything that didn't require references. But those jobs either paid poorly or demanded a level of physical endurance she just didn't have. Some were night shifts, others so far away that the commute would cost more than the hourly wage. A message popped up on her phone. It was from Nina, her old roommate back in Ohio. Your sister says hi. She tied her shoes all by herself today. Didn't need any help. I cried just watching. Rachel smiled through sudden tears. Her sister was growing stronger while she herself felt like she was unraveling. She couldn't give up, but she also couldn't move forward when every door in the city seemed to slam shut in her face, one by one. And the worst part was she didn't even know why. No one told her anything. No one explained. Just silence and polite refusals. A quiet punishment aimed straight at her kindness. Rachel began to wonder if she'd been wrong for doing what was right. Vincent Moretti sat listening to a recording of Calvin Riggs's conversation with a potential investor. Calvin was bragging about firing a troublesome employee who damaged the restaurant's image, and about sharing her record with partners to prevent future issues. Vincent smiled faintly, but it wasn't a smile of humor. It was something colder, something much deeper. This world, he thought, still has men who believe they can silence goodness. But not this time. He wouldn't allow it. And Rachel Bennett would never have to fight alone again. That afternoon, the rain returned, not as heavy as before, but enough to chill the air and darken the city. Rachel sat curled up on a bench in a small park near her building, her old umbrella torn on one side, raindrops sliding down to the tips of her shoes. She came here whenever she needed to breathe, when the walls of her apartment felt too small, too heavy. Today was no different. After hours of failed job searches, she just wanted to sit, to be alone at least for a little while. She didn't know she was being watched, not in a dangerous way, but with precision, patience, and a clear purpose. Vincent Moretti sat a few benches away, beneath a half-bare tree near the street lamp, in his dark overcoat and lowered hat. He looked like any man waiting for a bus or taking shelter from the rain, but his eyes never left Rachel. He had been watching her for 3 days, not to control her, but to understand. He had seen her wake early, stop by employment offices, visit small diners asking about openings, and return home empty-handed. He had seen her give away her last piece of bread to a crying child on the sidewalk, and he had seen her like this, alone, quiet, holding on to the last fragments of peace she still had left in her life. Vincent exhaled softly and stood. He didn't want to startle her. Rachel was the kind of person who would build walls if she felt threatened, and though he was a man accustomed to authority and influence, he knew there were people who could retreat forever after just one wrong approach. As he walked toward her, Rachel flinched. She looked up, her eyes weary. Vincent stopped 3 steps away, keeping a respectful distance. I'm sorry to startle you, he said, his voice low and calm. I was just hoping to share the bench, if you don't mind. She hesitated, then nodded faintly. Go ahead. He sat at the opposite end of the bench, not too close. The rain fell lightly, creating a silvery haze on the stone path ahead. Ms. Bennett, right? Rachel turned sharply, her body tensing. How do you know my name? I know a few things, he replied. But I'm not here to frighten you. I'm here because I owe you a thank you. Rachel frowned. I don't understand. Last week, he said. In a restaurant, you helped a homeless woman, gave her food, and lost your job for it. She stayed silent. Part of her wanted to leave, but something in his tone, steady, honest, without a trace of pity, made her stay. That woman, Vincent continued slowly, was my mother. The air seemed to still. Rachel straightened, her eyes wide. She was your mother? Vincent nodded. She'd been missing for months. No one could find her. We didn't know if she was alive or gone. But because of you, I found her. You have no idea what you did. Rachel still couldn't find her voice. She remembered the woman's trembling hands, the way she held the spoon as if it were the first warm thing she'd touched in years. She had never thought that simple act could be part of something greater. My name is Vincent Moretti, he said quietly. You may have heard it somewhere, or maybe not, but I'm not here as anything other than a son, wanting to thank the person who helped his mother. Rachel took a slow breath. I didn't do it for anything. I just saw someone who needed help. That's all. I know, Vincent said. And because you didn't expect anything in return, your kindness matters even more. He reached into his coat and took out an envelope, thin, plain, and clearly containing no money. In here is a letter of recommendation, he said. From a small restaurant I know. They're looking for staff and they're not connected to your old chain. They don't ask about blacklists. They'll see you for who you are, not who they say you were. Rachel hesitated, then took the envelope. She wasn't sure she believed him, but there was something in his eyes, something steady, that made it impossible to refuse. Why are you helping me? She asked softly. Because you helped her without knowing who she was, he said. Sometimes one small act is enough to change everything. And I believe if anyone deserves a new beginning, it's you. Vincent stood, nodded politely, and walked away the same way he came. Quietly, humbly, leaving behind something she couldn't name, but could definitely feel. Rachel sat there, gripping the envelope, the rain still falling, but somehow it felt less cold. 3 days after that encounter with the mysterious man named Vincent Moretti, Rachel officially began her new job. It was a small, family-owned restaurant tucked away in a quiet corner of East Brooklyn, not fancy, but warm and welcoming. No one there mentioned blacklists. No one asked about her past. She was retrained from scratch. How to take orders, how to serve elderly guests, how to smile again without forcing it. For the first time in weeks, Rachel laughed at work. She even started to believe that maybe the worst was finally behind her. But what Rachel didn't know was that good deeds rarely go unnoticed, especially in a city where every word, every gesture, could find its way to the wrong ears. That afternoon, after her shift ended, Rachel stepped out of the restaurant, pulling her thin gray coat tighter around her body against the late autumn chill. She was about to turn left toward home when a woman approached her, well-dressed, lightly made up, with the polished ease of someone who worked in an office. The woman smiled politely. Excuse me, are you Rachel Bennett? Rachel instinctively took half a step back. Yes, I am. Is something wrong? My name is Eva, the woman said. I work for an organization that supports women facing challenges in their careers. We heard about what happened to you, the unfair treatment you faced in the service industry. Your story has been spreading across a few forums. It's very inspiring. Rachel frowned. I didn't share anything. Eva smiled faintly. Perhaps not personally, but someone else must have. You helped a homeless woman, didn't you, and got fired for it? Rachel nodded, cautious. We're very interested in stories like yours, Eva continued. Our organization doesn't just offer financial assistance. We also connect women with better job opportunities, higher pay, a fair chance. Would you be open to hearing about it? Thank you, Rachel said. But I already have a job. I just started and I'm happy there. Eva kept her smile unfazed. Of course, but sometimes real opportunities don't come twice. Please think about it. I'll leave you my card in case you change your mind. Rachel accepted the small business card. It was embossed with a circular logo she didn't recognize. The words, Women Forward, printed beneath it. She nodded politely, then walked away without looking back. Still, an odd unease crept into her chest, a feeling of having been quietly exposed without understanding why. That night, Rachel searched the organization's name on her phone. Nothing came up, just a few vague links. No headquarters, no staff listed, no verification. It existed just enough to be seen, but not enough to be traced. She set her phone down, her heart starting to beat faster. The next morning, when she walked into the kitchen, she found a bouquet waiting for her. Pure white roses, beautifully trimmed, fresh, and expensive looking. There was no card, no name. She had never received flowers before, and certainly no one at the restaurant knew her well enough to send any. Her brief smile faded when she noticed a single black ribbon tied loosely around the stems. Subtle but deliberate. The kind of detail you saw in movies when a message wasn't meant to be friendly. Vincent heard about it just a few hours later. Eli entered his office, his face tense. "Someone's trying to make contact," he said. Pretending to be a charity group, handed her a business card, no record of it anywhere. And this morning, flowers were delivered to her workplace, the kind you send as a warning, not a gift. Vincent closed the folder in front of him, his expression hardening. He didn't need to guess who it was. Several names flickered through his mind. Men who had waited years for a chance to strike back at him. But they weren't going after him anymore. They were going after someone weaker, easier to hurt, someone who, without knowing it, had become the keeper of a debt he could never repay with money. "Keep her safe," he said quietly. "For now, don't tell her. I don't want her living in fear. But if anyone so much as touches her," his voice dropped, low and final, "don't wait for me to give the order." Rachel had no idea that from the moment she turned down that stranger's outstretched hand, she had stepped into a battle she never chose. But she wasn't alone anymore. Somewhere in the shadows, a man was watching over her, not to control her, but to protect her. And he was ready to do whatever it took if anyone dared to turn her kindness into a weakness. That night, the rain didn't fall, but the wind howled through Brooklyn's narrow alleys like distant whispers in the dark. Rachel finished her shift later than usual. The restaurant was quiet, just a few regulars lingering over their last cups of coffee. She said her goodbyes, pulled on her coat, adjusted her hat, and stepped out into the street with her worn canvas bag slung across her shoulder. Only 2 blocks left to her apartment. She didn't see the gray van without plates rolling silently behind her. Headlights off, engine barely audible. She didn't notice the 2 men stepping from a nearby corner, walking slowly, matching her pace as if they were simply heading home. Rachel turned into a narrow alley, a shortcut she had used for months. It wasn't well lit, but it saved her 3 minutes. She quickened her pace as the cold deepened, shoving her hands into her pockets. Then she heard footsteps closer, heavier. She glanced back, but saw nothing. Probably just someone walking the same way, she told herself. But as soon as she turned forward again, a rough hand clamped down on her shoulder. Rachel screamed, twisting, but the man was too strong. He pressed a damp cloth against her mouth, the stench of chemicals burning her nose. Her eyes widened in terror as she clawed at his arm, reaching for anything in her bag. The world spun as she was dragged backward into the shadows. Her consciousness fading fast. Tires screeched. Headlights flared. 2 gunshots cracked through the night, sharp and final. One man dropped to the ground, his hand still clutching the fabric of Rachel's coat. The other bolted into the dark like a wounded animal. Rachel collapsed to the pavement, gasping, trembling. She looked up through the haze and saw a man approaching, his shadow stretching long under the white beam of the headlights. It was Vincent. No calm composure, only the dark fire in his eyes and the gun still smoking in his hand. Eli ran from the car, dropping to one knee beside Rachel. He checked her pulse, his hand steady against her trembling shoulder. "It's all right," he said quietly. "You're safe now. They won't get another chance." Rachel tried to sit up, her whole body shaking. She couldn't form words. She just looked at Vincent, her eyes wide, filled with shock, fear, and 100 questions she couldn't voice. Vincent stepped closer, sliding the gun back beneath his coat. His voice was low, rough like the wind. "I'm sorry you had to go through that," he said. "I should have intervened sooner." Who were they?" Rachel rasped, her voice shaking. "Why me?" Vincent looked at her for a long time before he sat down beside the cold stone bench she leaned against. "There are people who don't want me to live in peace," he said finally. And they know it hurts more to target those I care about than to come after me directly. Rachel's eyes widened. For the first time, she understood she was caught in something much larger than she'd ever imagined. She wasn't just the waitress who once fed a homeless woman. She had become the weakness of a powerful man. A man she hadn't even realized she had touched so deeply. "I don't want you to be afraid," Vincent said quietly. "But I won't lie. There will be risks, but there will also be protection. From now on, wherever you go, there will be someone watching, not to control you, but to make sure you'll never face this alone." Rachel went still, gratitude and fear twisted together inside her chest. She hadn't chosen this path, but it had chosen her that night in the rain, when she'd placed a bowl of soup in front of a stranger. Another car arrived to take Rachel home. Vincent watched as she left, his gaze stripped of its usual coldness. It wasn't the look of a crime lord, only of a man who had almost lost the one debt that still made him human. That night, Rachel didn't sleep. She lay in the dark, listening to every sound in the hallway, her heart quickening with every gust of wind slipping through the cracks of the door. But inside her, one truth had settled clearly. She was no longer an outsider, and the world she was stepping into now had no way back. The next morning, Rachel woke with an unfamiliar feeling. The apartment was the same. The cracked ceiling, the hum of traffic outside, the same gray light seeping through the blinds. Yet the air felt different after the night she'd nearly been taken. She knew she no longer belonged to an ordinary life. Everything seemed to have shifted one step away, making space for a new reality. One where kindness didn't just lead to warmth, but sometimes to blood, to guns, and to shadows. She sat by the window holding a cup of tea gone cold, her eyes unfocused as the crowd moved below. Part of her wanted to run, to leave the city, to vanish as if she never existed. But another part whispered that if she did, she'd let evil win, and she'd never been someone who gave up easily. A knock sounded at the door, soft but firm. She opened it to find Eli standing there, calm as always. "Mr. Moretti would like to see you today, if you're willing," he said. Rachel nodded without hesitation. She didn't want to hide anymore, and she needed answers. She needed to know what she had really stepped into. Half an hour later, she sat inside a glass-walled room at the top of a building she'd never even dreamed of entering. The city stretched beneath her like a living map. Inside there was only a wide wooden table, 2 cups of coffee, and Vincent Moretti. He sat there in a simple dark suit, calm as ever, yet carrying a quiet depth she hadn't noticed before. Rachel sat across from him, spine straight, hands folded tightly in her lap as if holding herself together. "Are you all right?" Vincent began, his voice gentler than she remembered. "I'm alive," Rachel said evenly. "That's enough. But I didn't come here for apologies." Vincent inclined his head. "I didn't ask you here to apologize. I came to make you an offer." Rachel said nothing. Her pulse slowed, steady but heavy. She waited. "I want you to work with me," he said plainly. "Not in my business, not in the shadows, but in the open. I want to create something real, a project for people like my mother and the ones you've helped, and I want you to lead it." Rachel blinked for a moment. She thought she'd misheard. You're talking about a charity?" "No," Vincent said softly. "I'm talking about a community kitchen, a place that doesn't just feed people, it gives them back their dignity. No lines, no pity, just warm food, kindness, and someone willing to listen." Rachel sat in silence, her throat tightening. "Why me?" she asked at last. "Because you didn't do the right thing to be seen," Vincent said quietly. "And because you did what was right when no one else had the courage to. That's something that can't be taught. That's character." Rachel looked at him, her expression sharpening. "And what's the price? I know your world doesn't hand out anything for free." Vincent gave a faint smile, not mocking, just honest. "The price, if there is one, is accepting that you won't be an outsider anymore. You'll be watched, challenged, threatened. It might even be more dangerous than last night. But I'll be here, and you won't be alone." She exhaled slowly. Never in her life had she imagined sitting in a room like this, hearing a man who had once represented everything she avoided talk about compassion and rebuilding. Yet deep down she knew this was a turning point. "If I agree," she said, her voice steady, "I do it my way. No politics, no image building, no pretending, just food and people who need it." Vincent nodded. "That's exactly why I want you to lead." She looked down at the coffee cup between them. It was cold now, neither sweet nor bitter, just bland, like the days before everything changed. "All right," she said softly, "but I'm not doing this to repay anything. I'm doing it because it's something worth fighting for." Vincent inclined his head slightly, unable to hide the quiet satisfaction in his eyes. "We're more alike than you think, Rachel." She didn't answer, but a faint spark had appeared behind her gaze. Not anger, but resolve. Once again, she was walking into a storm, but this time she was choosing it, and she wasn't afraid. That afternoon, Rachel was taken to a small house at the end of a quiet street in Carroll Gardens. The two-story home was covered in ivy, old but clean, warm, and alive. Eli said little as he opened the door, only mentioning that someone wished to see her. Rachel stepped inside, unsure what to expect. She had agreed to Vincent's offer, but she hadn't realized it would come with another meeting. The sound of boiling water came from the kitchen. Rachel stepped into the living room and stopped short. There she was, the silver-haired woman from that rainy night, the one she had fed, the reason she had lost her job. Now the woman stood before her, small and graceful, pouring tea from a porcelain pot. She wore a pale blue sweater, her thin hands steady and strong. "You're Rachel, aren't you?" Helen smiled gently, her voice soft as a breeze. "You fed me when everyone else just walked past." Rachel nodded slowly. "Yes. I didn't expect to see you again like this." Helen placed 2 cups of tea on the table and sat across from her, unhurried. "I went very far," she said, "trying to forget a world I once believed I could fix. But that night, in that bowl of soup you placed before me, I didn't just feel food. I felt humanity again, and that pulled me back to the world." Rachel's fingers tightened in her lap. "I didn't do anything special. It was just what anyone should have done." "But no one did," Helen replied, lifting her gaze. Her eyes were clear, unwavering. "And that's why you're the one I wanted to speak with today. I thought you didn't approve of the path your son chose," Rachel said quietly, hesitant. "I never approved," Helen said without pause. "But I never stopped loving him either. And now I understand the world isn't divided into black and white. There are spaces in between right and wrong, between power and kindness." Rachel stayed silent, her throat tight. "Vincent can make things happen with money and influence," Helen continued slowly, weighing every word. "But you make people believe. I saw it in your eyes that night. You didn't look at me with pity or suspicion. You looked at me with respect." Rachel lowered her head, her voice trembling. "I'm scared. I don't know how to live in a world of power. I don't know how to be seen." Helen tilted her head slightly. "Do you think I wasn't afraid when I walked away from my own world? I used to teach children. I believed that if I gave them enough knowledge, I could change them. But then I saw children growing up between bullets and cold nights, and I realized they didn't need lessons. They needed a hot meal, a blanket, a gaze that didn't judge." Her voice softened, but carried weight. "Now you have the chance to give that to hundreds, maybe thousands, not for Vincent, but for yourself." Rachel looked up, her eyes glistening. "But what if I fail?" Helen smiled faintly. "Failure isn't what's frightening, my dear. What's frightening is never beginning at all." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Helen reached out and clasped Rachel's hand. "Hands. I'm not someone who trusts easily," she said, her voice soft. "But that night you made me believe in this world again. And now it's your turn to help others believe, too." Rachel squeezed the older woman's hand, feeling a surge of warmth travel through her skin, slowly dissolving the walls she'd spent years constructing around herself. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was on this journey alone. Standing behind her was not just a powerful man, but also a mother, a woman who had once bravely ventured into the darkness to truly understand it, and who now stood shoulder to shoulder with Rachel, offering a faith that only a mother could give, even to someone who wasn't her own child. A week after her heart-to-heart with Helen, Rachel found herself standing in the center of a cavernous, old warehouse beneath the Manhattan Bridge, a building that had once been a bustling bakery back in the 1940s. The brick walls were marred with chips and cracks, evidence of the passage of time. The windows were veiled in years of accumulated grime, obscuring the outside world. The air hung heavy with the distinct aromas of rust and aged wood. But Rachel didn't focus on the decay. Instead, she saw the immense potential that lay within those walls. She envisioned a space large enough to house industrial-grade kitchens, long, communal dining tables, a cozy reading corner, a well-stocked pantry, and maybe even a small, vibrant garden out back. In her mind's eye, everything was already beginning to take shape. This wouldn't be just another place that handed out food and then quickly sent people on their way. This would be a home. Vincent entered quietly behind her, carefully holding a rolled-up set of blueprints. He was dressed more casually than usual, his sleeves rolled up, revealing a more relaxed demeanor. His eyes followed Rachel's every move, studying her intently, yet quietly. "Have you decided on the color yet?" he asked, his tone laced with a hint of playful teasing. "I'm leaning toward a cream yellow," she said, gently brushing her hand against the wall. "Not too bright, but warm enough to feel inviting." Vincent nodded in agreement and carefully placed the plans on an old, weathered wooden table coated in a thick layer of dust. "The architect says it'll take 3 months to complete the renovations, but if you need it done sooner, I can bring in more crews, expedite the process." "I don't want it rushed," Rachel replied firmly. "I want it done right. This isn't just a campaign, Vincent. It's a long-term commitment." "Good," Vincent said simply, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. "Very good." They walked down a long corridor that led to the main storage area, where broken pallets were scattered haphazardly across the floor, creating a sense of disarray. Rachel stopped in the middle of the open space and took a deep, cleansing breath, filling her lungs with the musty air. "I want this area to be the main kitchen," she declared, her voice filled with purpose. "Half for professional chefs and half for volunteers in training. We can prepare at least 500 meals a day, and at night maybe we can offer free cooking classes for anyone who wants to learn." Vincent listened attentively, saying nothing, simply nodding in quiet agreement as she continued, her voice calm, assured, like someone who had already meticulously envisioned every detail in her mind. "That corner over there will be the dining area," she said, pointing to a specific spot. "Not just a sterile line for handouts, but real tables, real service. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, like a valued guest." "And that section," Vincent said, pointing toward the far end of the warehouse, near the back door. Rachel smiled faintly, a hint of excitement in her eyes. "That's where we'll have a quiet reading space, maybe even offer some legal and health counseling. Most people who come here aren't just hungry for food, Vincent. They're hungry to be heard, to be understood." Vincent studied her for a long moment, his expression thoughtful. "You're not just thinking about the meals, are you?" "No," Rachel said softly, her gaze meeting his. "I'm thinking about dignity. Sometimes all it takes is a proper seat at a table to remind someone of their inherent worth, who they truly are." Eli entered the warehouse, carrying a clipboard filled with budget estimates, and handed it to Vincent for his approval. Vincent didn't even bother to read it, only asked, "What else do you need, Rachel?" "A volunteer coordinator," Rachel said without hesitation, "a head chef who can train others effectively, and a skilled legal team to fast-track all the necessary permits." Vincent turned to Eli, his voice firm and decisive. 3 days. I want it all done." Rachel looked at him, a mixture of surprise and awe on her face. He didn't just make empty promises. He took decisive action, and he placed his unwavering trust in her, in a way that no one ever had before. The next morning, the work began in earnest. Builders, engineers, architects, interior designers, and enthusiastic volunteers from various local community groups arrived one after another, filling the warehouse with a sense of purpose and energy. Rachel was there every day from sunrise, dressed in jeans, worn sneakers, her hands constantly covered in paint and dust, but always wearing a genuine smile on her face. Helen came, too, bringing trays of freshly baked cookies and thermoses filled with hot coffee for everyone. She wasn't just Vincent's mother anymore. She quickly became the heart and soul of the entire project. Grandma Helen, as everyone affectionately called her, was the wise woman who always knew exactly when to offer helpful advice and when to simply offer a quiet, comforting hug. By the second week, Rachel had hung a large, hand-painted sign on the main kitchen wall. It read, "Every meal is a chance to begin again." One afternoon, as Rachel was inspecting the newly installed ventilation system, a middle-aged woman stepped into the warehouse quietly. Her clothes were simple and unassuming, and her eyes were filled with a sense of weariness. "Is this the place?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible. "That's supposed to feed people like me?" Rachel paused for a moment, then smiled warmly. "Not feed," she corrected gently. "Invite. Please come in and have a seat." And in that moment, Rachel knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. No grand banners, no intrusive press, no self-aggrandizing speeches, just a welcoming place filled with light, the comforting aroma of warm bread, and genuine humanity. Every brick, every meticulously planned detail, every freshly baked loaf, all of it had led to something far larger than herself, something that no mafia could ever buy, no politician could ever fake. Hope. And Rachel was building it, brick by brick, day by day. That morning, the city woke to the rare and beautiful sight of winter sunlight streaming down on the small street that led to the newly renovated warehouse in Carroll Gardens. A quiet line of people had already formed outside, patiently waiting. There was no shouting, no pushing, only a sense of quiet anticipation. They had heard rumors of a special place that didn't ask too many questions. A place where anyone could simply sit down and eat with dignity. The handwritten sign above the door read, "Hope Kitchen, where everyone has a seat." Below it, a small light glowed softly, not for show, but as a quiet whisper in the darkness, a gentle reminder that you are not forgotten. Rachel stood behind the counter, one hand resting on the cool stainless steel. She wore a simple gray chef's coat, and her hair was neatly tied back. The uncertainty that had once haunted her eyes was gone, replaced by a newfound sense of purpose and resolve. Volunteers, many of whom had once been homeless, broken, and hopeless, now worked together seamlessly, chopping vegetables, stirring soup, stacking bread, preparing the space as if it were a holiday feast. Vincent lingered in the background, not as a fearsome crime boss, but as the man who had quietly helped build this place from the ruins of despair. He gave Rachel a silent nod of encouragement and support. Helen was there, too, carrying a tray of cookies, greeting everyone with that same calm, reassuring smile. At precisely 9 a.m., the doors opened. The first guests were a young boy and his mother, both wearing thin coats, their eyes wide with disbelief that this place was actually real. Rachel welcomed them with a warm nod and a genuine smile. "Come in," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "Today's the start of something new." The air immediately filled with life, the comforting smell of freshly baked bread mingling with the aroma of hot soup. A quiet laugh came from table 3, where an old man was sharing a story from years past. In one corner, 2 men, former inmates, worked side by side, meticulously arranging pickles, their hands still trembling slightly, but their eyes shining with a newfound hope. The volunteers served each person with equal grace and respect. There were no long lines, no demeaning labels, no rigid hierarchy. Everyone who walked through those doors was met with the same warm, welcoming look, one that said, "You belong here." Behind them, a small group of local journalists had arrived, cameras in hand. But Rachel had already set one firm rule. They could film, but only from a distance. No intrusive interviews with the guests, no blinding spotlights. This wasn't a story about her or about a crime boss trying to change his legacy. It was a story about community, about creating a safe and welcoming space where no one was left behind. Near noon, an elderly woman approached one of the corner tables. Holding a worn plastic bag with a pair of torn gloves inside, she sat down carefully, her eyes darting around the room with a quiet sense of hesitation. Rachel walked over, pulled up a chair, and placed a steaming bowl of soup and a piece of warm bread in front of her. "Would you like to join everyone else at the table?" Rachel asked softly, her voice filled with genuine warmth. The woman nodded, her eyes shimmering with tears. "It's been a long time since I've sat down to eat with anyone." Rachel didn't answer. She simply poured a glass of water, placed it beside the spoon, and said gently, "You're not alone here." By the end of the day, more than 300 meals had been served. No one was turned away. No one left without being touched by something. A kind glance, a warm smile, or a quiet invitation to come back tomorrow. Vincent stood by the back door, watching the last guest leave. He said nothing, but there was a calm light in his eyes, not the look of a man who had won a battle, but of one who had finally understood that true peace didn't come from power or control, but from genuine gratitude and heartfelt connection. Rachel stayed behind to close the kitchen. She washed every bowl, checked the rice, the vegetables, and the bread supply for tomorrow. Her body ached with exhaustion, but every step she took was steady and purposeful. She knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more days ahead, more people to feed, more stories to hear, and Hope Kitchen would always keep its doors open, not just as a shelter, but as a home, a place where everyone had a seat, a place where kindness didn't need permission to exist. News about Hope Kitchen spread faster than any publicity campaign Rachel could have ever imagined, even though she never reached out to the media herself. Within days, photos of the humble meals, the tender smiles, and the warm, inviting atmosphere began circulating online, capturing the hearts of people near and far. A freelance photojournalist, who had once been served lunch there, posted a single, powerful image of a young boy sitting beside his mother, holding a piece of warm bread, with a caption that read, "Not everyone is hungry for food. Some are hungry because the world stopped seeing them as human." The post went viral, garnering tens of thousands of shares in just 2 days. Major newspapers began calling, eager to tell the story of Hope Kitchen. A local TV station requested an interview with Rachel, but she declined to appear on camera. Instead, she graciously invited them to speak with the volunteers, the regular guests, the ones who used to sleep on park benches and were now serving soup with quiet pride, as if they were returning something that had once been unjustly taken from them. An article from the New York Voice ran with the headline, "Hope Kitchen. No names, no questions, just, are you hungry?" The piece told Helen's inspiring story, once homeless herself, now the heart that kept the kitchen warm and welcoming. Her words touched thousands of readers, inspiring people to comment, to share, to act, not just scroll past and forget. But not everyone approved of Hope Kitchen. Some critics accused it of romanticizing homelessness, while others claimed that the free meals encouraged dependency. A few even went so far as to write that Hope Kitchen was nothing more than a calculated PR stunt, a soft rebranding for a man with a criminal past. Vincent read every word in silence. He didn't respond, didn't issue a statement, didn't grant any interviews. He only said to Eli, "The louder the opposition, the more you know you've struck the nerve that needed to be struck." Inside Hope Kitchen, Rachel kept everything the same. She firmly rejected every offer to commercialize the space. No ads, no corporate logos, no branded bowls or banners would ever be allowed in this place. She often said, "We keep names, not labels." A group of architecture students volunteered their time after seeing the images online. They suggested improving the lighting and adding outdoor seating for the spring. An elderly woman brought in 3 worn books, calling them a gift for the quietest reading corner I've ever seen. A former 5-star chef stopped by and generously offered to teach cooking classes for those rebuilding their lives after making mistakes. People came not just for the food, but for the feeling that they still belonged to the city, that they weren't invisible, that they hadn't been cast aside. One afternoon, while Rachel was washing vegetables in the kitchen, a young girl, about 12 years old, walked in holding a small plastic box. "I baked cookies," she said shyly. My mom said the food here was so good last time, we wanted to give something back. Rachel looked up and smiled warmly. She didn't ask the girl's name. I've got the perfect spot for those cookies, she said, her voice filled with genuine appreciation. Outside, the city remained loud and restless as always. But deep within it, in a quiet corner built of old brick and goodwill, something profound was shifting. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily, like a flame burning low in a kitchen stove. And no matter how much people debated, criticized, praised, or doubted, Hope Kitchen opened its doors every morning, greeting each person who walked in as if they were the most important soul in the world. Because for Rachel, for Helen, for Vincent, and for everyone who had helped build this place, it was more than just a kitchen. It was living, breathing proof that kindness needed no permission, only faith. On a quiet weekend evening, when the lights of Hope Kitchen had dimmed and the last guests had left, Rachel sat alone in the peaceful kitchen, her apron draped over the chair, a cup of tea cooling in her hand. Behind the wooden doors was a small room that had once been used to store flour and sugar, but was now a refuge for those with nowhere else to go. Every day, she saw new faces come in, hesitant at first, then softening, as if the air itself carried a kind of peace that was strong enough to quiet even the worst memories. Rachel had never imagined that she would lead a community. Once, all she had wanted was stability, a steady job, a small apartment, a life without the constant fear of tomorrow's bills. But ever since that rainy night when she had placed a simple bowl of soup before a stranger, everything had changed. Not in some grand cinematic way, but slowly, steadily, day by day, her small act of kindness had grown a body, a voice, and a weight of its own. Helen visited most mornings, bringing a bundle of wildflowers or a loaf of freshly baked bread. She didn't talk much, but whenever Rachel saw her sitting with a new guest, gently resting a hand on their shoulder, she felt as though she were watching a kind of family take shape, one without blood ties, but bound together by shared warmth and genuine connection. One morning, as they were folding napkins together, Helen said quietly, "Some families aren't born from blood, my dear. They're born from the moments when people sit together, share a meal, and finally feel safe." Vincent kept his distance. He didn't interfere, didn't appear in public, but whenever Rachel needed help, he was always there. When the plumbing system broke down the night before a citywide meal, Vincent made 2 quick phone calls, and within an hour, an entire team of engineers arrived to fix the problem. He said nothing, only watched from afar before quietly leaving, as if the only thing he wanted was to make sure that she could keep doing what she believed in. The volunteers had become a family of their own. Some had struggled with addiction, some had done time, some had been disowned by their own families, but here they learned how to care for others and in doing so how to heal themselves. Mike, a man who had once slept outside the train station for years, was now the first to arrive every morning and the last to leave. He didn't speak much. He just wiped tables, refilled tea, and folded every napkin with meticulous care. And then there were the moments, small, fragile, unforgettable. An old man bringing a photo of his late wife to dinner every evening. A little girl giving Rachel a handmade bracelet woven from red yarn. Tiny acts of love scattered like light across the room. Gentle reminders that sometimes, even after the storm, kindness doesn't just survive, it rebuilds. A middle-aged man, once scorned by the entire city for his past mistakes, leaned toward her after dinner and whispered, "It's been 10 years since anyone called me by my real name. Thank you for doing that today." In that quiet moment, Rachel realized that she wasn't just running a kitchen. She was tending a flame, small, yes, but steady. A flame that didn't burn, only warmed, and within its light, people who had long been strangers were slowly rediscovering the human parts of themselves that they thought were gone forever. One evening after cleaning up, Rachel sat beside Helen. The older woman asked softly, "Do you feel like you're where you're meant to be?" Rachel looked out the window, where a yellow street lamp shimmered against the wet pavement. Then she nodded. "I don't know if this is fate," she said quietly, "but for the first time in my life, I don't feel like I'm running from something. I'm walking toward it." Helen smiled, a small, tender smile that seemed to carry a lifetime of understanding. "Then you found the most important thing, my dear," she said. "Not just a roof, but a family." And inside Hope Kitchen, that family was growing, through handshakes, through slices of shared bread, through the heart of a young woman who had once believed that one small act could never change anything, but now knew that one bowl of soup could begin an entirely new life. On a cold March morning, pale sunlight slipped through the fogged kitchen windows. As always, Rachel rose before everyone else, brewed coffee, checked the ingredient list, and prepared the morning briefing. Everything unfolded as usual, and yet, for several days now, she had carried an uneasy feeling, a faint awareness that someone was watching her, every movement, every step. It wasn't clear. There was no solid proof, just a quiet, stubborn chill that clung to her like the lingering cold of early spring. At first, she dismissed it as nerves. Maybe things had gone too smoothly lately. Maybe the ghosts of the past hadn't really left. But then, small, unsettling things began to happen. One morning, she found the back door unlocked, even though she distinctly remembered locking it herself the night before. Another day, muddy footprints appeared in the hallway, right by the stairs leading to the storage loft where she kept important documents and files. No one on her team had been up there. She checked the security camera footage, but the recording during that hour was blank, as if someone had deliberately erased it. When she told Eli about it, she saw something flicker behind his calm expression. Eli wasn't easily shaken. He was composed even in the midst of chaos. But this time he stayed silent longer than usual before answering. "We've noticed it too," he said quietly. "Nothing direct yet, but there have been strange signals in the security feed. Unmarked cars parking outside, staying for a few minutes, then leaving." "Vincent's been informed," Eli added. Rachel nodded. She didn't press further. If Eli said that, it meant things were more serious than she had initially imagined. And if Vincent had been alerted, then perhaps the old ghosts weren't done returning, not for him, but for her. That evening, as she walked home, she heard footsteps behind her. Steady, even, keeping pace with her own. She crossed 3 intersections, changed direction twice, but the sound remained, neither closer nor farther. She stopped, pretending to check her phone. The footsteps stopped too. She turned slightly, just enough to catch the shape of a tall, lean figure in a dark coat, a hat pulled low over his face. The way he tilted his head, one hand casually in his pocket, made her blood run cold. This wasn't someone who was lost. This was someone who was deliberately watching her. She quickened her pace, her heart pounding in her chest. Then, suddenly, a car rolled up behind her, the window lowering. It was Eli's voice. "Get in." Rachel didn't ask how he knew. She just obeyed. Safety returned in an instant. As the car glided past the man, Rachel looked back. He didn't follow, didn't move. He just stood there, watching. The next day, Hope Kitchen opened as usual, but in Rachel's eyes, there was a new edge, an alertness beneath the calm. She still smiled, still served soup, still laughed with the guests, but inside, she knew that something had shifted. Helen noticed it one late afternoon as they were folding napkins together. She spoke barely above a whisper. "You feel threatened again, don't you?" Rachel didn't have to nod. Her expression said it all. Helen simply reached out and squeezed her hand, offering silent support. "You're not alone," she said, her voice filled with reassurance. "And this time we don't retreat." That night, in the small office behind the kitchen, Vincent studied the report that Eli had placed before him. Old names, old forces that had once vanished into the darkness were stirring again. He lifted his glass of wine, turned it once thoughtfully, then set it down. "They think I've grown weak because I chose to walk away," he murmured almost to himself. "They forget that when you protect something out of love instead of power, it becomes stronger than anything fear can build." He turned toward the window. The yellow glow from the street light spread across the damp asphalt. Beneath that light, he whispered, almost to himself, "If they touch her this time, they'll pay more than they ever imagined." Early the next morning, before the city had fully awakened, Vincent Moretti sat alone in a dimly lit back room of an old cafe in Little Italy. It wasn't an office, nor a place he frequented anymore, but it was where the most consequential meetings of his life had once taken place. The filtered light through heavy curtains cast long shadows across the wooden table, creating an atmosphere of secrecy and tension. Eli stood silently outside the door, waiting. He didn't need to be told what was happening. He knew what Vincent was about to do, the very thing that the underworld of New York had been whispering about for weeks. The old rivals had returned, and this time, they weren't coming for territory or power. They were coming for his heart, for Hope Kitchen, for Rachel. The door opened, and 4 men stepped in. Leading them was Franco Bianchi, a familiar face, but never a welcome one. Once an ally, then an enemy, when his path had veered into human trafficking and laundering money through fake charities. Now he was back not only to challenge Vincent, but to send a message to the entire underworld. The era of compassion was over. Vincent didn't rise. He simply looked at Franco and spoke evenly. "I hope you didn't come here just to start a war." Franco smiled, the chilling smile of men who had never learned restraint. "I came to remind you that this world still works the same way. You walk away from the table, thinking you can wash your hands clean with a soup kitchen? Everything you've built I can burn to the ground in one night." Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he opened a drawer and pulled out a photograph. It was a picture of a young, dark-skinned boy, his eyes hollow, washing dishes in Hope Kitchen. The boy had been one of Franco's victims, once caught in his trafficking ring. Vincent placed the photo on the table. "I'm not here to beg you for mercy," he said calmly. "I'm here to warn you. Touch anyone in that kitchen, even with a threat, and I won't follow the old rules. I'll redraw the lines with blood, if I have to." Franco narrowed his eyes, his expression hardening. "You'd crawl back into the dirt for one girl?" "Not for one girl," Vincent replied, his tone low and deliberate. "For something I've failed to protect my entire life. Rachel is the first person who's done what's right with no one standing behind her. I'm different now. I stand behind her and I don't step back." Franco's smile faltered, and a flicker of caution flickered behind his arrogance. He knew that Vincent never bluffed, and he knew that when Vincent showed himself this openly, he was no longer alone. Behind him stood an unseen network of men and women who owed him their lives, people who had sworn never to betray him. The meeting didn't last long. Franco picked up the photograph, studied it for a moment, then placed it back on the table. "We won't touch the girl," he said, his voice still laced with insincerity. "But remember this," Franco said, his tone ominous. His tone was as sharp as broken glass. "The things you build on kindness, they rarely last long in a city like this." Vincent lifted his head, his eyes steady, not filled with anger, just unwavering resolve. "What I build may not last forever," he said quietly, "but it will live true, and every person who walks into that kitchen will stand as proof of something you can't destroy: dignity." When Franco and his men finally left, Eli stepped forward. "Are you sure he'll keep his word?" he asked in a hushed tone. "No," Vincent replied simply, "but I'm sure of this. If they try to bring down a place like Hope Kitchen, they'll have to bring down more than one person. They'll have to fight something they'll never understand: compassion." That afternoon, Rachel went about her work, completely unaware of the tense meeting that had just transpired. She served dinner as usual, listening to people's stories, even placing an extra spoon in the hand of a small boy who had wandered in from a temporary shelter nearby. Outside, however, beyond the warm, golden light spilling from the kitchen windows, Vincent stood silently, watching through the glass. He didn't say a word to her about what had happened. He didn't need to. The line had been drawn in the sand, and this time, no one would dare cross it. Rachel was starting to understand that kindness didn't always equate to peace and tranquility. Several weeks had passed since Hope Kitchen had first opened its doors, since she had stood before hundreds of people, offering them not just food, but something even more valuable: a sense of belonging. Yet each morning, as she rose early to wash the vegetables, and as the laughter of the volunteers echoed through the kitchen as sunlight streamed across the tiled floor, there was a quiet, heavy feeling in her chest. It wasn't anxiety, and it wasn't necessarily fear of the shadowy figures that sometimes lingered outside, but it was the weight of carrying more than she had ever expected she could. People weren't just coming to Hope Kitchen to get a hot meal. They were coming to be seen, to be called by their name, to feel acknowledged as part of the world once again. And when no one else would do that for them, Rachel stepped up and became the first. Whether by choice or by chance, she became their anchor, the one everyone told their stories to. And those stories, growing in number each and every day, thickened around her like an invisible dust, clinging, settling, sometimes making it hard to breathe. One evening, a middle-aged man wrapped his arms around her after dinner, sobbing uncontrollably. He explained that his wife had passed away the night before, and he hadn't known where else to go, who else to call. He had just remembered the kitchen and thought that maybe, just maybe, someone there would lend him an ear. Another night, a young woman arrived late, her face pale, her wrists bruised. She whispered that she had escaped an abusive home and that no one ever believed her. Rachel held her close, and when the girl finally left, Rachel felt a hollow ache open up in her chest. It wasn't because she didn't want to help. It was because she knew she couldn't possibly help everyone. Then came the whispers, the insidious rumors that started to circulate. Some people began saying that Hope Kitchen was just a front for something darker, something sinister. That Rachel was merely a mouthpiece for Vincent Moretti, and that everything was just an elaborate performance, carefully staged and meticulously polished. Rachel didn't crave recognition or accolades, but the words stung, not because they were true, but because they came from people she genuinely thought understood her and her intentions. One night, long after everyone had left for the evening, Rachel sat alone in the corner of the kitchen, her eyes shadowed with fatigue. The soft yellow light flickered gently against the tiled walls. Helen walked in, carrying a steaming cup of tea. She sat down beside her without saying a word. "Do you ever ask yourself why you're doing all this?" Rachel murmured, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the refrigerator. "Sometimes it feels like I'm holding up a world that's already falling apart. One person at a time. Every person has a story. Every day a new crack appears. And I'm afraid that one day, I'll crack too." Helen didn't answer immediately. She handed Rachel the cup of tea, her hand resting lightly on the younger woman's shoulder, studying her with a kind and understanding gaze. "Once," Helen began slowly, "I asked Vincent why he chose the path he did. He said it was because he simply couldn't stand feeling helpless, watching weaker people being trampled on and taken advantage of." She paused for a moment. "But I realized something later. If you carry that helplessness for too long without learning when to set it down, it'll trample you instead. You have to learn not to hold it all," she continued. "You can't save everyone, Rachel, but you've given them something invaluable. A place to begin again, a seat at a table, a look that says they matter. And that's enough, more than enough." Rachel nodded slowly, but tears began to stream down her cheeks. She wasn't crying from weakness or despair, but from the overwhelming fear that if she started, she might not be able to stop. That night, Vincent arrived late. Standing in the doorway, he saw Rachel and Helen sitting together, the two women from different generations, bound together by the same kind of wounds. He didn't enter the kitchen. He just watched them for a moment, then quietly turned away and left. The next morning, when Rachel walked into the kitchen, she found a new schedule pinned to the wall. Vincent had meticulously divided the volunteer shifts, carefully balanced the workload, and even added mandatory rest periods specifically for her. At the bottom, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "You must know when to lay the wood down. Those are the words to keep the fire alive." Rachel read it, smiled through her tears, and for the first time in weeks, allowed herself to sit down and finish a cup of tea while it was still warm. Because now she finally understood that kindness didn't need to hurt to have meaning, and that, in order to keep giving, she had to learn to keep something for herself. Every morning at Hope Kitchen began with the comforting aroma of toasted bread wafting from the back and the familiar rhythm of footsteps from the earliest arrivals. Gone were the days of hesitation and downcast eyes. Now, Each person who crossed the threshold carried a quiet confidence, enough to lift their head and offer a genuine smile. Rachel stood at the counter, her apron tied neatly around her waist, her hair pulled back. She was no longer the woman trying to shoulder the weight of the entire world. She was part of it, steady, resilient, and strong enough to be a pillar of support without losing herself in the process. At a table by the window, old Joe carefully polished the glass cups. He had once lived beneath the Brooklyn Bridge for nearly 20 years. He had been among the first to step into Hope Kitchen when it still smelled of fresh paint and plaster. At first, he ate in complete silence, speaking to no one, but slowly, he began clearing tables, washing dishes, and finally, he asked if he could become an official volunteer. A week later, he showed up in a pressed old suit, explaining that he wanted to look respectable for a respectable place. Rachel said nothing, but simply took his hand and held it for a long, meaningful moment. Joe wasn't just someone who had been helped. He was living proof that dignity never truly dies. It only needs a place to be called by its name again. Across the long table on the left, Carla, the young woman who had fled an abusive relationship, was now learning to write a job application under Helen's patient guidance. Every week, Helen dedicated her afternoons to teaching literacy to those who had left school too soon or had never had the chance to go in the first place. Carla no longer hid in corners, filled with fear and shame. She laughed more, her voice clear and steady, no longer flinching when someone approached her. Nearby, 8-year-old Jamal sat drawing with colored pencils that Rachel had given him. His mother, Marissa, once a nurse, had lost her job after a long and difficult battle with depression. They had wandered for months, sleeping in their car and eating discarded food from supermarket bins. Now, Jamal proudly called Hope Kitchen my first school. He learned to fold napkins, wash dishes, and then he taught his mother everything he had been shown. One day, he handed Rachel a drawing. A big kitchen full of people eating together, smiling and laughing. Below it, in uneven, childlike letters, he had written, "Thank you for remembering my name." Vincent, though never physically present during mealtimes, knew everything that happened inside those walls. Eli sent him daily reports, along with photos and handwritten notes from those who had been helped by Hope Kitchen. He read each one carefully, pausing longest on the simplest, most heartfelt words. Once, among a stack of notes, one small piece of paper stopped him cold. It read, "This was the first time since 2008 that someone poured me water and asked me to sit. No one mentioned the smell of my clothes. They only asked if I wanted more bread." For Rachel, stories like these no longer brought her to tears. Yet, they carved themselves deeper and deeper into her heart. She understood now that what Hope Kitchen offered wasn't just food to fill their bellies. It was the feeling of being seen, being called by one's real name, and being treated like a person worthy of kindness and respect. One afternoon, while washing dishes, Carla turned to Rachel, her voice quiet but firm. "I just applied for a job as an assistant cook at the restaurant down the street," she said. "They said they'll call me back. If I get it, I'll still come on Sundays to help if you need me." Rachel smiled warmly. "I'll always need you and anyone who's ever passed through this place." Because to her, success wasn't measured by how many meals were served, but by how many people walked out of those doors holding their heads a little higher than when they arrived. Hope Kitchen didn't heal everyone, but every single day, it reminded people that their dignity could never truly be taken away. It only needed someone willing to give it back, little by little, meal by meal, with clean hands and eyes free of judgment. And Rachel, along with people like Joe, Carla, Marissa, and countless others, was living proof that even the smallest acts of goodness could sustain an entire faith in humanity. When spring gently brushed against the city, the cold winds gave way to soft sunlight. Trees began to bud along the sidewalks, and Hope Kitchen kept its doors open as if it had never known how to close them. There was no longer the overwhelming chaos and strain that had marked the early days. Every person inside, from the volunteers to the newcomers, moved in harmony with the rhythm of the place, where each meal was not just nourishment, but an affirmation of their inherent worth. Rachel stood by the kitchen window, looking out at the bench where young Jamal sat, reading aloud to old Joe. A gentle breeze tugged at the boy's hair, but he kept reading, his voice steady and clear, as if those words were the only thing that existed in that moment. In another corner, Carla helped Helen arrange cookies on trays. Their laughter drifted through the golden morning light, sounding like the very essence of home. Someone once asked Rachel whether she planned to expand Hope Kitchen, to open more branches, to turn it into a citywide model. She simply smiled and shook her head. Sometimes, she said, what a city needs most is just one single place that truly cares about each person. Not flashy, not fast-growing, just a place that holds on to the one thing that truly matters. Kindness. A bowl of soup, a warm look, a simple question. Are you doing okay today? Vincent still watched from afar, from the shadows. He no longer needed to step inside the kitchen because he knew that Rachel didn't need him to keep it standing. She had become the one others looked to, not because of power or authority, but because of her quiet strength and her unwavering compassion. He finally believed that even the smallest, most seemingly insignificant things could stand firm in a chaotic and unpredictable world. The story of Hope Kitchen didn't end with a grand twist or roaring applause or banners proclaiming victory. It ended with small, ordinary moments that kept unfolding, day after day. A new guest walking in, their eyes filled with doubt and apprehension. A plate of bread placed gently before them. A simple greeting, warm and genuine, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, something inside them began to change. Dear listener, if you've stayed with this story until the very end, perhaps a small seed of hope lives inside you, too. Maybe you've been Rachel, tired, worn down, and feeling alone, but still choosing kindness in the face of adversity. Maybe you're Joe or Carla or Jamal or Marissa, someone who lost their way, only to find themselves again because someone reached out at the right time, offering a helping hand and a glimmer of hope. Or maybe you're simply a witness, wondering if places like Hope Kitchen still actually exist out there in the world. The answer is yes, they do. And if not, then you can be the one to start something like it, to create that safe and welcoming space. You don't need to open an entire kitchen. Sometimes, it takes only one small act, one kind look, one moment of truly listening to change a day, maybe even a life. One bowl of soup, one name remembered, one seat at a table where no one is judged. Every single one of those things could be a beginning. If this story touched something in your heart, please share your thoughts below. We would love to hear from you. What did this story make you think of in your own life? Have you ever given or received kindness in a way that profoundly changed you? Tell us your story, because your experience might be the spark that inspires someone else to make a difference in their own community. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share our YouTube channel, Underworld Love Stories. Your support is what allows us to keep bringing you heartfelt, deeply human stories that heal and inspire every single day. Thank you for spending your precious time with us. May you stay healthy, live peacefully, and find something kind to give or to receive each and every day. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you in our next story.